Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I've got some absolutely wild Reddit stories for you. Alright, let's jump into the first story. So this happened about 6 months ago, but I'm still processing it and my family won't stop bringing it up at every gathering. I need to know if I was actually in the wrong here. I have a younger sister named Emma. She's 26. I'm 31. We've always had a decent relationship. Nothing crazy dramatic. Just the usual sibling stuff. She got engaged last year to her boyfriend of 4 years, and everyone was excited. The guy's nice enough, stable job, treats her well, no red flags. Emma asked me to be her maid of honor, which I was genuinely honored about. I said yes immediately. I helped with planning, went to all the dress shopping appointments, organized the bachelorette party, the whole deal. I took this role seriously because I wanted her day to be perfect. Here's where things get complicated. Emma has always been very particular about aesthetics. Everything has to match. Everything has to look a certain way for photos. I get it. It's her wedding. She wants it to look good. But it started getting a bit intense about 3 months before the wedding. She created this massive group chat with all the bridesmaids and started sending very specific requirements. The dresses were already chosen. That was fine. But then she started adding rules. No one could have their nails done in certain colors. Our shoes had to be a specific shade of nude. We all had to have our hair done by her chosen stylist. At our own expense, obviously, and we couldn't deviate from the 3 approved hairstyles she'd selected. I went along with most of it. Again, her day, her rules. But then 2 weeks before the wedding, she sent a message that made me pause. She said she needed all the bridesmaids to dye their hair to complementary shades because she wanted the photos to have a cohesive color palette. She'd created a whole chart showing which bridesmaid should have which hair color. I have dark brown hair, almost black. According to her chart, I was supposed to go light auburn. My best friend, who was also a bridesmaid, had beautiful natural red hair and was being asked to go dark brown. Another bridesmaid with blonde hair was supposed to go honey caramel. I called Emma instead of responding in the group chat. I tried to be gentle about it. I said I understood she wanted everything to look perfect, but asking people to dramatically change their hair color 2 weeks before the wedding seemed like a lot. I mentioned that hair dye can be unpredictable. Someone could have an allergic reaction. The colors might not turn out right, and some people might not be comfortable with such a drastic change. She did not take it well. She said I was being unsupportive and that if I really cared about her wedding, I'd do this one thing for her. She said it was temporary. We could dye it back after. She started crying and said she'd been planning this color scheme for months and had even checked with the photographer to make sure it would look good in pictures. I stood my ground. I said I loved her and wanted to support her, but I wasn't going to dye my hair. I'd been growing it out for 2 years and finally had it healthy and the length I wanted. The idea of putting bleach and dye in it for someone else's aesthetic preference just felt wrong. She hung up on me. 10 minutes later, I got a text saying I was no longer the maid of honor. An hour after that, I was removed from the bridesmaid group chat entirely. Then I got a call from my mom asking what I'd done to upset Emma so badly right before her wedding. I tried to explain the situation to my mom, and she said I should just do it to keep the peace. It's just hair, it grows back. Emma's stressed about the wedding, all the usual stuff. My dad stayed out of it entirely. Some of my extended family started taking sides without even knowing the full story. The other bridesmaids all agreed to dye their hair. I found this out through social media. Emma posted photos of them all at the salon, together with a caption about bridesmaids who really show up for you. It was clearly a dig at me. I still went to the wedding as a guest. I wore a nice dress, brought a generous gift, and sat quietly during the ceremony. The bridesmaid's hair actually looked really nice. I'll admit, the photos were aesthetically beautiful. Emma looked gorgeous, but she didn't speak to me the entire day. When I tried to approach her to congratulate her, she literally turned away and started talking to someone else. That was 6 months ago. We still barely talk. She'll respond to family group chats with one-word answers if I'm involved in the conversation. At Thanksgiving, she made a comment about people who can't make small sacrifices for family. while looking directly at me. My mom keeps telling me I should apologize for ruining her wedding memories, but I didn't ruin anything. I attended as a guest. I was respectful. I just didn't dye my hair. Some of my cousins have told me I should have just done it, that it wasn't worth losing a relationship with my sister over. But I also have friends who say Emma's request was completely unreasonable and borderline controlling, so I need outside perspective here. Should I have just dyed my hair to keep the peace and be a good sister? Or was I right to set that boundary? Let's move on to the next one. This is one of those situations where I did almost nothing, and it still worked out beautifully. Sometimes karma doesn't need much help. I work in a mid-sized marketing firm. It's a pretty standard office environment, nothing too corporate, but also not a casual startup. We have about 40 employees, and most people are friendly enough, but there's always that one person who makes work harder than it needs to be. In my case, that person was Kelly. Kelly worked in the same department as me, technically at the same level, but she'd been there about 6 months longer and seemed to think that made her my supervisor. It didn't. We both reported to the same manager, David. Kelly had this habit of trying to take credit for other people's work. She'd sit in on meetings, hear your ideas, and then present them as her own to David when you weren't around. She'd volunteer to help with projects and then do minimal work while her name got added to the final presentation. It was subtle enough that calling it out made you look petty, but consistent enough that it was clearly intentional. I've been dealing with this for about 3 months when the incident happened. We've been assigned to work together on a campaign for a new client, a local restaurant chain trying to rebrand. It was a big account for our firm, and David made it clear this was important. Kelly and I had very different ideas about the direction we should take. I wanted to focus on the restaurant's history and family recipes, playing up the authenticity angle. Kelly wanted something more modern and trendy, focusing on the Instagrammability of the food. Both approaches had merit, but we needed to pick one. David told us to each develop our concepts and present them to him, and he'd decide which direction to go. Fair enough. I spent about 2 weeks putting together a presentation with mock-ups, sample social media posts, taglines, the whole package. I saved everything in my personal work folder on the shared drive. The day before our presentations were scheduled, I came back from lunch and Kelly was at my desk. She jumped when she saw me and said she was just borrowing a pen. Weird, but okay. Later that afternoon, I went to do some final edits on my presentation and noticed the file had been opened while I was at lunch. The timestamp matched exactly when I'd seen Kelly at my desk. I didn't panic. I just made a copy of my presentation and saved it in a different location. Then I did something petty, but justified in my opinion. I went back to the original file and changed everything. I kept the same layout so it looked complete, but I swapped in terrible ideas, bad taglines, low-quality images I grabbed from free stock photo sites, completely incoherent social media strategies. I made it look like a presentation someone would make if they'd never worked in marketing before. The next day, I presented first. I used my actual presentation, the good one, I'd hidden away. David loved it. He asked great questions, seemed genuinely excited about the direction, and told me it was exactly what the client would want to see. Then it was Kelly's turn. She opened her laptop, pulled up the presentation, and I watched her face go through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, panic, anger, realization, and then forced confidence. She tried to present the terrible version she'd stolen from me, attempting to explain the ideas in real time, making it up as she went. It was beautiful. David kept interrupting with questions she couldn't answer. Why would we use this particular stock photo when it has a watermark? Can you explain the strategy behind this tagline? This color scheme doesn't match any of the restaurant's existing branding. What's the reasoning there? She completely fell apart, started stuttering, couldn't explain her choices, eventually admitted she'd had some technical difficulties, and this wasn't her final version. David was clearly unimpressed, but said we'd revisit it the next day. Here's where Kelly made her critical mistake. Instead of just taking the loss and moving on, she panicked. She went to HR and filed a complaint against me. She claimed I'd sabotaged her work by going into her files and changing her presentation. HR took this seriously, as they should. They launched an investigation. They pulled the access logs from the shared drive, and that's when everything came together beautifully. The logs showed that Kelly had accessed my personal work folder the day before presentations. She'd opened my presentation file, spent 15 minutes viewing it, and then closed it. There was no legitimate reason for her to be in my personal folder. Then the logs showed that I'd accessed my own file after that, made edits, and saved a copy elsewhere. HR called us both in for individual meetings. I showed them my original presentation file, the timestamp showing when I'd created it, and explained what I'd noticed the day of presentations. I admitted I'd made changes to the file after realizing someone had accessed it, but I'd only changed my own work in my own folder, which I was allowed to do. Kelly, meanwhile, couldn't explain why she'd been in my folder at all. She tried to say she was looking for reference materials, but HR pointed out that she'd specifically opened a file clearly labeled with my name and the project title. She tried to say it was an accident, but 15 minutes wasn't an accident. The investigation concluded that Kelly had attempted to steal my work and then blamed me when her stolen version didn't work out. She got a formal warning, was removed from the project entirely, and had to attend some kind of ethics training. David approved my concept. I ended up leading the campaign solo, and it turned out great. The client loved it and signed on for 3 more campaigns. Kelly still works here, but she doesn't talk to me anymore. She definitely doesn't sit at my desk when I'm at lunch, and I learned a valuable lesson about protecting my work and letting people self-destruct with minimal interference. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting someone report themselves to HR. Let's get into the next story. I got married 2 years ago to my husband Jake. He's great. We have a good relationship, no major issues. But his mother Carol has been a challenge from day one. Not in an obvious, dramatic way, but in that subtle way where she always has to have input on everything and gets hurt if you don't take her suggestions. When we got engaged, she had opinions about the venue, the date, the guest list, my dress, the flowers, everything. We tried to be accommodating where we could, but we also set some boundaries. She didn't love that, but she dealt with it. By the time the wedding actually happened, things had smoothed out mostly. Then I got pregnant. We were excited, it was planned, and we announced it to both families at 3 months. Carol immediately started with the suggestions. She wanted to throw the baby shower at her house. She had ideas for nursery themes. She sent me articles about parenting approaches. She asked if we'd considered certain baby name books. Again, I tried to be gracious. Some of her ideas were actually helpful. She threw a beautiful baby shower, but the name thing became an issue. We found out we were having a boy at the 20-week ultrasound. Jake and I had already been discussing names, and we'd pretty much settled on Elliot. It's a name we both loved. It had no negative associations for either of us, and it worked well with our last name. We felt good about it. We made the mistake of telling our families the name we'd chosen when I was about 6 months pregnant. My parents said it was lovely. Jake's dad said it was a solid name. Carol got quiet, and then she said, "Oh, that's different." I should have known right then, but I didn't push it. I just said we really liked it and changed the subject. Over the next few weeks, Carol kept bringing up names in conversation. She'd mention names of babies she'd met recently. She'd comment on celebrity baby names. She'd bring up family names from Jake's side. It was constant, but never quite direct enough to call out. Then, at about 7 months pregnant, we were at dinner at their house. Carol brought out this framed family tree she'd been working on. She walked us through it, showing us all the names going back generations. Then she got to Jake's branch and stopped at our future son's spot. "You know," she said, "Jake's grandfather was named Thomas Elliot. It's such a strong name, and Thomas hasn't been used in the family since. I've always hoped one of my grandchildren would carry on that name." Jake and I looked at each other. Neither of us had known his grandfather's middle name was Elliot. This felt like a setup. "That's interesting," I said carefully. We didn't know that. Oh yes, Carol continued. Thomas was a wonderful man. He served in the war, built his own business, raised 4 children. Having a grandson named after him would mean so much to the family. Here's the thing. Jake's grandfather had passed away before we'd even met. Jake had never mentioned him much, and from what little I'd heard, they hadn't been particularly close. When I asked Jake about it later, he confirmed that he had good memories of his grandfather, but they'd only seen each other a few times a year at family gatherings. I told Jake I wasn't comfortable changing the name to Thomas, just because his mom suggested it at 7 months. We'd chosen Elliot. We loved Elliot. If we'd known Thomas was important to him personally, that would be different. But this felt like his mom manufacturing importance to get her way. Jake agreed. He called his mom a few days later and told her we appreciated the family history, but we were keeping the name Elliot. We thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. Carol started a campaign. She told other family members that we were refusing to honor Jake's grandfather. She posted on Facebook about how much she missed Thomas and how she'd always dreamed of having a grandson named after him. She bought a Christmas ornament that said Thomas and hung it on their tree, saying she was saving it for when we came to our senses. Jake's aunts started calling him. His cousins were messaging me on social media. Everyone had an opinion about this name situation. Some people said we should just use Thomas as a middle name to compromise. Others said it was our baby and our choice. One uncle said we were being disrespectful to family legacy. I was 8 months pregnant, hormonal, exhausted, and now dealing with family drama over a name. I cried more than once over this. Jake was frustrated too, but he wasn't the one fielding messages and comments constantly. Finally, I'd had enough. Jake and I sat down and wrote a message that we sent to the whole family group chat. We explained that we'd chosen the name Elliot months before we knew about Thomas Elliot. We loved the name for our own reasons. We respected Jake's grandfather, but we'd never met him, and neither Jake nor I felt a personal connection to his name. We weren't trying to be disrespectful. We were just naming our son something meaningful to us. We asked everyone to please respect our decision and stop bringing it up. Most people backed off after that, but Carol didn't. She continued making comments, continued posting about Thomas, continued telling people that was going to be the baby's name. Elliot was born 3 weeks later. He's perfect, and his name fits him completely. We announced his birth with his full name in the hospital. Carol came to visit, held him, said he was beautiful, and then immediately said, "Are you sure you don't want to add Thomas as a middle name? It's not too late to change the birth certificate." Jake asked her to leave. She was upset, claimed she was just trying to help, but Jake held firm. She left in tears. That was 4 months ago. Carol has barely seen Elliot since. She says it's because we're not welcoming to her. But really, it's because she can't accept that we didn't name our son what she wanted. She still occasionally refers to him as Thomas in family conversations, which Jake immediately corrects every time. My parents think Carol is being ridiculous. Some of Jake's family think we should have just compromised. I think we made the right call, but the family tension has been exhausting. Part of me wonders if we should have just used Thomas as a middle name to keep the peace. But another part of me knows that giving in on this would have just set a precedent for her controlling other aspects of how we parent. So that's where we are. I have a beautiful baby boy named Elliot and a mother-in-law who barely speaks to me because of it. All right, let's dive into the next story. I live in an apartment complex with assigned parking spaces. This is important because parking is clearly marked. Everyone gets one spot with their apartment number painted on it, and the lease explicitly states you can only park in your assigned space. My assigned space is right in front of my building, which is convenient. I'm in apartment 12, so my space is marked with the big yellow 12. Can't miss it. About 4 months ago, new neighbors moved into the building. A couple, maybe in their late 20s, seemed normal enough. I saw them moving in, gave them a friendly wave, thought nothing of it. Then they started parking in my spot. Not occasionally, not by accident, consistently. I'd come home from work, and their car would be in space 12, my space. The first time it happened, I knocked on doors until I figured out which apartment was theirs. I politely explained that they were in my assigned spot and asked if they could move. The guy, I'll call him Brett, said, "Oh, sorry, man," and moved the car. I thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. 2 days later, they were in my spot again. I knocked again. This time, his girlfriend answered. She seemed annoyed that I was bothering them, but moved the car. She made a comment about how it's just a parking spot as she was leaving. This pattern continued for 2 weeks. I'd come home, they'd be in my spot. I'd have to park in visitor parking far from my building. I'd knock on their door. They'd act inconvenienced. They'd move. Every single time they acted like this was the first time it had happened, and I was being unreasonable for asking. I left a note on their car one day. Polite, just said, "Hi, this is assigned parking space number 12. Please park in your assigned spot. Thanks." With a smiley face because I was still trying to be nice. They parked there again the next day. Note was gone, but clearly they'd gotten it and ignored it. I talked to the apartment management. They said they'd send a warning to the tenants, which they did. For about 3 days, Brett and his girlfriend parked in their actual assigned spot, which was literally 4 spaces down from mine. Not even far, just 4 spaces away. Then they went right back to parking in my spot. I was done being nice. I started documenting every time they parked in my space. Photos with timestamps. I sent these to management weekly. Management sent multiple warnings. Brett and his girlfriend didn't care. They'd get a warning, park correctly for a day or 2, then go right back to my spot. The thing that really got me was that their actual assigned spot was always empty. They weren't parking in my spot because theirs was taken. They were doing it because my spot was slightly more convenient to the building entrance. We're talking about a difference of maybe 20 extra steps to their spot. That's it. They were being this inconsiderate over 20 steps. After 6 weeks of this, I decided to get creative. I couldn't have them towed because the apartment complex didn't enforce parking that way. Management could find them, but kept saying they needed to go through the proper channels, which was taking forever. I needed a solution that didn't involve confrontation because clearly talking to them didn't work. So I started parking behind them, not blocking them in completely, just positioning my car so they'd have to do like a 15-point turn to get out. It was technically still visitor parking, technically legal, just really inconvenient for them. The first morning I did this, I heard banging on my door at 6:45 a.m. Brett was furious. He needed to get to work and I was blocking him. I very slowly got dressed, very slowly grabbed my keys, very slowly walked to my car. Took my time. He missed whatever appointment he had. I did this every single time they parked in my spot. They'd park in space 12. I'd park behind them in the most inconvenient way possible while still being legal. They'd have to knock on my door, wait for me to feel like moving, and deal with the inconvenience they'd been putting me through for weeks. After about a week of this, Brett confronted me in the parking lot. He said I was being a jerk and I needed to stop. I said I'd stop parking behind him when he stopped parking in my assigned space. He said my spot was barely closer to his apartment than his assigned spot. I pointed out that his spot was barely farther from his apartment than mine, so he could just park there. He didn't have a response to that. His girlfriend tried a different approach. She caught me in the hallway and tried to be sweet about it. Said they didn't realize it was such a big deal, and could we just share the spot? I said no, we could not share the spot because it was assigned to me and they had their own assigned spot 4 spaces away. She got huffy and said I was being inflexible. They kept parking in my spot. I kept parking behind them. This went on for another 2 weeks. They tried leaving earlier to avoid me, but I started working from home more, so I was around at random times. They tried leaving passive-aggressive notes on my car. I threw them away. Then management finally came through. Turns out, after 3 months of documented violations and multiple warnings, they could actually enforce penalties. Brett and his girlfriend got hit with fines. Not huge ones, but enough to be annoying. $50 per violation, and I documented about 20 violations. They owed the apartment complex $1,000. Suddenly they stopped parking in my spot. Just like that. It took hitting their wallet, but they stopped. They moved out 2 months later. When they were loading the moving truck, Brett made a comment to his friend about the psycho in apartment 12 who freaked out over a parking spot. I was on my balcony and heard the whole thing. I waved at him. He did not wave back. The new neighbors who moved in park in their assigned spot. We've never had a single issue. Turns out most people can follow basic rules without being jerks about it. Was I petty? Absolutely. Was it justified? I think so. They had their own spot. They chose to repeatedly take mine despite multiple polite requests, notes, and warnings. At some point, you have to make people face consequences for being inconsiderate. My parking spot has been peacefully mine ever since. Moving on to the next one. This happened during my senior year of college. I was a communications major, doing pretty well. Had a decent GPA, just trying to make it through my last semester. I had this capstone class that was required for graduation, and a huge part of our grade was a group project. The project was to create a full marketing campaign for a real local business. We had to do market research, develop a strategy, create actual advertisements, and present everything to the business owner and our professor. It was worth 40% of our final grade. Basically, if you bombed the group project, you failed the class. Our professor assigned us to groups of 4. I got grouped with 3 people I'd never worked with before. There was Madison, who seemed super organized and enthusiastic. There was Tyler, who was quiet but took good notes in class. And there was Zach, who showed up late to the first group meeting and immediately gave me bad vibes. We had 8 weeks to complete the project. We set up a meeting schedule, created a shared document to track our progress, and divided up the initial research tasks. Everyone agreed to their responsibilities. It seemed like it might actually go smoothly. Week 1, everyone completed their assigned research. Even Zach submitted his part, though it was pretty minimal, and submitted at 11:58 p.m. the night before our meeting. But it was done, so whatever. Week 2, we were supposed to start developing our strategy based on the research. Madison and I worked together on the overall approach. Tyler started drafting some initial ad concepts. Zach was supposed to create a competitive analysis, looking at what similar businesses were doing. His deadline was Friday. Friday came and went. No competitive analysis. I messaged him Friday night. No response. Saturday morning I called him. He answered, said he'd been super busy, and would have it done by Sunday. Sunday night, he submitted 2 paragraphs. Not even a full analysis, just 2 paragraphs with no sources. No real information, barely coherent. Madison had to spend Monday completely redoing his section. Week 3, same thing. Zach promised he'd do his part, didn't do it. Submitted garbage at the last minute. Tyler and I ended up splitting his work and doing it ourselves because we couldn't afford to fall behind. By week 4, we tried to have an intervention. The 3 of us sat down with Zach and explained that he needed to step up. This was a huge part of our grade. We were all trying to graduate, and we needed him to actually contribute. He apologized, said he was dealing with some personal stuff, promised he'd do better. We believed him because we wanted to believe him. Week 5, he did nothing. Absolutely nothing. Didn't even pretend to try. Stopped responding to messages in the group chat. Didn't show up to our scheduled meeting. Madison was panicking because she'd been counting on him to complete the social media component of our campaign, which was a significant piece. I took over the social media stuff. Stayed up until 3 a.m. working on it because we had a deadline. I was exhausted and frustrated and starting to genuinely hate Zach. Week 6, we went to the professor. We explained the situation, showed her the message history, showed her the shared document with all the edit history proving that Zach had contributed basically nothing. We asked if there was any way to remove him from our group, or at least have our individual contributions graded separately. The professor said no. She said part of the learning experience was dealing with difficult group members, and that in the real world, we'd have to work with people who don't pull their weight. She said our grade was our grade as a group and we needed to figure it out. Absolutely useless advice. But okay. Week 7, we stopped trying to include Zach. We divided all the remaining work between the three of us, worked our butts off, and put together what I genuinely thought was a really strong campaign. Our presentation was scheduled for week 8. 3 days before the presentation, Zach messaged the group chat. First message in 2 weeks. He said he wanted to be included in the presentation and asked what part he should present. I was furious. This guy had contributed nothing, ignored us for weeks, and now wanted to stand up there and take credit for our work. Madison, who was much nicer than me, suggested he could present the introduction since it was short and hard to mess up. Tyler agreed. I reluctantly went along with it because I didn't want to deal with more drama right before the presentation. We met the day before to practice. Zach showed up, looked over the slides for the first time, and said our campaign was pretty good. Pretty good. The campaign he'd done zero work on was pretty good. I almost lost it, but Tyler gave me a look that said to just let it go. Presentation day. The business owner was there, the professor was there, and 3 other groups were presenting that day too. We were up second. Madison went first, nailed her section. Tyler went next, did great. Then it was Zach's turn to do the introduction. He stood up, looked at the slide, and started talking. Not presenting what we'd prepared, just talking. Making up statistics that weren't in our research. Mentioning strategies we hadn't included in the campaign. Saying things that contradicted what Madison and Tyler had just presented. It was a disaster. I could see the business owner looking confused. The professor was taking notes with this concerned expression. I wanted to disappear, but we couldn't stop him without making it worse, so we just had to let him finish his rambling nonsense introduction. Then it was my turn. I presented my section, tried to subtly correct some of what Zach had said without being obvious about it, and wrapped up. We took questions from the business owner and the professor, which we answered well enough, but the damage was done. Our introduction had been incoherent and wrong, and it made our whole presentation look disorganized. We got a B- on the project. Not terrible, but not the A I knew we deserved for the work Madison, Tyler, and I had actually put in. The professor's feedback specifically mentioned that our introduction lacked coherence and contained unsupported claims. After grades were posted, Madison sent an email to the professor. She very professionally explained the situation again, attached all the documentation we'd saved, and asked if there was any way to appeal our grade, given that one group member had not contributed and had actually hurt our final presentation. The professor responded that she understood our frustration, but the grade would stand. However, she said she'd make a note in Zach's academic file about his participation issues, which might matter for future recommendation letters. Cold comfort when my GPA had taken a hit, but whatever. I graduated, got a decent job, moved on with my life. But about a year later, I ran into Tyler at a coffee shop. We caught up, and he mentioned that he'd heard from someone in a younger class that Zach had failed out of school. Apparently, he'd pulled the same non-participation thing in multiple classes. Professors had noticed the pattern, and he'd eventually been academically dismissed. I'm not going to lie, I felt a sense of justice about that. Probably makes me petty, but I'd spent 8 weeks carrying this guy's weight and watching my grades suffer because of him. Knowing that his laziness eventually caught up with him felt fair. The lesson I learned was that when a professor says, dealing with difficult group members is part of the learning experience, what they mean is, I don't want to deal with this, so you handle it. And sometimes, no matter how hard you work, you get punished for someone else's incompetence. I still have the final version of that marketing campaign saved on my computer. It really was good work. Just wish the grade had reflected that. Let's get into the next story. My extended family has this tradition of taking a big vacation together every 3 years. It's usually something like renting a beach house or going to a resort. All the cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents together for a week. It's been happening since I was a kid, and generally they're nice trips, good memories. 2 years ago, my Aunt Diane volunteered to plan the next family vacation. Diane is my mom's younger sister, and she's always been a bit extra. Everything has to be perfect. Everything has to be Instagrammable. She cares a lot about appearances, but she's family, and usually means well, so we all said, sure, go ahead and plan it. She announced that she'd found the perfect place, a big lake house in upstate New York, plenty of bedrooms, beautiful views, activities nearby. She'd already put down a deposit. The trip was scheduled for July, which was about 8 months away, so everyone had time to request off work and make arrangements. Then, the email started. Diane created a whole planning committee email chain and started sending messages constantly. She had spreadsheets for everything: meal plans, activity schedules, packing lists, rules for the house. It was intense, but okay, she was putting in a lot of effort. The costs started adding up in weird ways. The house rental itself was reasonable when split between all the families. But then Diane added on all these extras. She'd hired a photographer to take family photos every day. She'd booked activities for specific time slots that everyone had to participate in. She'd arranged for a private chef to cook 3 dinners during the week. None of this had been discussed with anyone, but she'd already paid for it, and now we all owed our share. My portion, for just myself and my husband, came out to about $1,800. That was more than I'd budgeted for the entire vacation, including the house rental. I called my mom, who called her other siblings, and everyone was surprised by the cost. My Uncle Brad called Diane and asked if we could maybe scale back some of the extras to bring the cost down. Diane got defensive. She said she was trying to create a special experience, and if people didn't want to pay for quality, maybe they didn't care about family memories. It got tense. Eventually, everyone agreed to pay because the deposits were already down and we didn't want to lose that money, but the vibes were already off and the trip was still months away. As July got closer, Diane's emails became more demanding. She sent out a packing list that included specific colors we should wear for the professional photos. She created a minute-by-minute schedule for each day. She assigned people to cook breakfast on certain mornings. She made rules about quiet hours, about cleaning responsibilities, about when people could use certain common areas. It was like she was running a military camp instead of planning a family vacation. My cousin Jessica pushed back on some of the scheduling. She and her husband had a baby, and she said they couldn't commit to being at breakfast at exactly 7:30 a.m. every day because the baby's sleep schedule was unpredictable. Diane responded that the baby should be on a schedule, and maybe Jessica needed to work on her parenting. It did not go over well. Jessica almost backed out of the trip entirely. Her mom, my Aunt Pam, had to mediate. Eventually, Diane agreed that Jessica's family could be flexible with the schedule, but she made it clear she wasn't happy about it. The trip finally arrived. We all drove to this lake house, which actually was beautiful. Great location, nice house, perfect weather. Should have been a great week. It was not a great week. Diane had printed out the schedule and posted copies all over the house. She'd wake people up if they were sleeping past the designated wake-up time. She'd get upset if people wanted to skip activities she'd planned. She criticized how people were dressing for the photos. She micromanaged every meal. She made passive-aggressive comments if anyone wasn't following her plan exactly. By day 2, people were hiding from her. My Uncle Brad started leaving early in the morning to go fishing, which really meant sitting in his car by the lake to get some peace. My cousins would volunteer to go grocery shopping just to get out of the house. My husband and I took very long walks. The professional photographer situation was awkward. She was this nice woman who'd been hired to take candid family photos throughout the week, but Diane kept staging everything, directing people to pose in specific ways, insisting on retakes if someone wasn't smiling right. The photos weren't candid at all. They were forced, and everyone looked uncomfortable in them. On day 4, my grandpa, who is usually pretty quiet and easygoing, lost his patience. Diane was upset because people weren't sitting in the correct seats for dinner, which she'd assigned based on who would look best in photos together. Grandpa said, "Diane, we're family, not props for your Instagram." Let people sit where they want. Diane started crying. She said she'd worked so hard to make this trip special, and no one appreciated it. My grandma tried to comfort her, which just made everyone else feel guilty. Dinner was very quiet. The rest of the trip was tense. Diane stopped trying to enforce the schedule quite so strictly, but she was clearly hurt and barely spoke to anyone. People tried to enjoy the lake house and the activities, but the atmosphere was just off. No one wanted to be the person who said they weren't having fun after Diane had put in all this effort and money. We left after 6 days instead of the full week. Multiple families made excuses about needing to get back early. My cousin Steve said he had a work emergency. My Aunt Pam said her dog sitter canceled. Everyone just wanted to go home. After the trip, there was this weird silence from Diane for a few weeks. Then she posted a whole album on Facebook with all the professional photos, captions about what a perfect family vacation it was, hashtags about making memories and being blessed. The photos actually did look good because the photographer was talented, but everyone who'd been there knew it was all for show. A few months later at Thanksgiving, my mom mentioned maybe starting to plan the next family vacation. Diane immediately said she wouldn't be planning it and that maybe we should skip the tradition. No one argued with her. We haven't done a family vacation since. Some of my cousins talk about maybe trying again with someone else planning, but everyone's nervous. The whole experience soured what's supposed to be a fun tradition. I think the lesson is that you can overplan something to the point where it stops being fun. Diane had good intentions. She wanted everything to be perfect, but she forgot that the point of a vacation is to relax and spend time together, not to stress about schedules and photo opportunities. Sometimes, good enough is better than perfect, especially when it comes to family time. Also, never let one person have complete control over planning a group vacation. Committees exist for a reason. All right, moving on. This is going back to high school, but I'm still a bit salty about it. Junior year, I had an English teacher I'll call Mr. Patterson. He was one of those teachers who thought he was way more important and intellectual than he actually was, wore tweed jackets with elbow patches, quoted philosophy constantly, acted like teaching high school English was some noble calling. I'm a decent writer. Not amazing, but competent. I'd always gotten A's and B's in English classes. I liked reading. I understood the material. I could write a coherent essay. No issues in any English class before this one. Mr. Patterson decided from day one that he didn't like me. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't seem impressed enough by his lectures. Maybe I asked the wrong question at the wrong time. Maybe he just picked someone to target every year, and I was it. But it was clear pretty quickly that he was grading me differently than other students. I turn in an essay, get a C- with vague feedback like lacks depth or unconvincing argument. Meanwhile, my friend Emma would turn in an essay with the same basic structure and argument and get an A- with glowing comments. I compared our essays multiple times. Hers weren't better than mine, they just weren't mine. My parents noticed my English grade dropping and asked what was going on. I tried to explain that I thought the teacher was grading me unfairly, but they assumed I was just making excuses for not doing well. They told me to try harder, talk to the teacher, ask for help improving. I did talk to Mr. Patterson. I asked what I could do to improve my grades. He gave me this condescending speech about how some students are naturally gifted writers, and others have to work much harder to achieve mediocrity. He said I was in the second category. Then he suggested I might want to consider whether college was the right path for me, since I was struggling with such basic coursework. I was 16 years old, and this teacher was telling me I wasn't smart enough for college because he decided to give me C's on essays that deserved better grades. It messed with my head more than I wanted to admit. I started working twice as hard on my English assignments. I'd write essays, revise them multiple times, have Emma proofread them, make sure they were as perfect as I could make them. I'd still get C's, sometimes C-. Meanwhile, I was getting A's in AP History, as in my science classes, B's in math. It was just English, just Mr. Patterson's class. Midway through the semester, we had a major essay assignment. It was on The Great Gatsby, which I'd actually really enjoyed reading. We had to write a literary analysis on a theme of our choice. I chose to write about the corruption of the American dream, which I thought was pretty obvious, but whatever. I worked on that essay for 2 weeks. I researched, I outlined, I wrote multiple drafts. I cited sources, I made sure my argument was clear and well supported. I felt really good about it. It was the best essay I'd written all year, maybe one of the best I'd ever written. I got a D. The feedback was superficial analysis, lacks original thought, numerous structural issues. There were no specific notes on what the structural issues were, no indication of what original thought he expected, nothing concrete I could actually learn from. I cried. I'm not proud of that, but I did. I felt like nothing I did mattered. This teacher had decided I was a bad student and nothing would change his mind. My mom finally believed something was wrong when she saw that essay. She's an English teacher herself, at a different school, and she read my Gatsby essay and said it was solid work, easily a B+ or A-. She said the feedback didn't match the actual content of the essay. She offered to talk to Mr. Patterson or the principal, but I was terrified of making things worse. Instead, we came up with a different plan. For my next essay assignment, my mom helped me research literary analysis essays. We found sample essays from college students, academic articles, professional criticism. I modeled my essay on those structures, used that level of citation and analysis. I was writing like a college English major, not a high school junior. I turned in what was honestly an over-the-top essay. It was probably too complex for the assignment, but it was undeniably good. Well-researched, sophisticated argument, perfect citations, college-level analysis. I got a B-. The feedback was overly complicated, trying too hard to impress. But it was a B-, which was better than anything else I'd gotten from him all semester. My mom said that proved he was grading me on a curve I couldn't win. If my essays were simple, they lacked depth. If they were complex, I was trying too hard. There was no right answer because he decided I was a bad student. She talked to my guidance counselor, who suggested I could drop the class and take English over the summer to stay on track. But I didn't want to give Mr. Patterson the satisfaction of running me out of his class. I stuck it out. For the final exam, we had to write an in-class essay analyzing a poem he gave us. We had 2 hours. Everyone in the room was writing their essays by hand, turning them in with their names at the top as usual. My mom had a suggestion. She said to write my essay, but before turning it in, copy it over onto a fresh piece of paper, and don't put my name on it yet. Have Mr. Patterson grade it blind, then add my name after he'd written his grade and feedback. It was a bit sneaky, but I was desperate. I wrote my essay during the exam. Felt pretty good about it. After class, I went to the bathroom and copied the entire essay onto fresh paper in slightly different handwriting. I left the name field blank. Then I went back and added my essay to the stack of submissions when Mr. Patterson wasn't looking. 2 weeks later, he returned the essays. He called out names and handed them back one by one. He got to mine, looked confused, checked his gradebook. My name wasn't called. After class, I went up to him and said I hadn't received my essay back. He checked his stack, found the essay without a name on it, and asked if this was mine. I said yes. I must have forgotten to write my name. He looked annoyed, but wrote my name in and handed it to me. The grade was an A-. The feedback was positive. Strong analysis, clear argument, good use of textual evidence. I showed my mom. She documented everything, the grade on the unnamed essay versus all my previous grades. She set up a meeting with the principal. The meeting was awkward. My mom presented all the evidence, my essays compared to Emma's essays with our different grades, the pattern of negative feedback with no specific actionable advice, the final essay that got an A- when he didn't know it was mine. The principal said they'd look into it, but I shouldn't expect any grade changes because Mr. Patterson had academic freedom in how he graded. However, he did talk to Mr. Patterson because after that meeting, my teacher stopped being quite so harsh. I ended the semester with a B-, which wasn't great, but was better than where I'd been heading. Senior year, I made sure to take English with a different teacher. Got an A both semesters. Went to college, took plenty of English courses, continued getting A's and B's like I had before Mr. Patterson. I heard later from other students that Mr. Patterson did this to at least one student every year. Just picked someone to grade unfairly, made their life miserable, and there was never any real consequence for it. He taught at that school for another 5 years before retiring. Looking back, I wish I'd made a bigger deal about it, but I was a teenager. I was intimidated by a teacher in a position of authority, and I just wanted to survive the class. The system doesn't always protect students from teachers who abuse their power, even in small ways like unfair grading. At least I proved to myself that I could write, that a minus on the blind graded essay meant more to me than any grade I'd gotten in that class, because it was the one grade that was actually based on the quality of my work and nothing else. Let's jump to the next story. I moved into an apartment with my friend Sarah when we were both 23. We'd known each other since college, got along well, seemed like a good roommate match. The apartment was nice, 2 bedrooms, good location, affordable when we split the rent. For the first 3 months, everything was great. We had compatible schedules, both cleaned up after ourselves, respected each other's space, no issues at all. Then Sarah started dating Kyle. Kyle seemed fine at first, normal guy, polite enough when I met him, whatever. Sarah was happy. I was happy for her. He started coming over for dinners, staying some nights. That's normal when you're dating someone. I didn't think anything of it, but gradually, slowly, Kyle started being there more and more. He'd be there when I left for work in the morning. He'd be there when I got home. His car was always in the visitor parking. His shoes were by the door. His food was in the fridge. After about a month of this, I realized Kyle was basically living with us. He wasn't on the lease. He wasn't paying rent. But he was there every single day. He'd shower there, eat there, sleep there, do his laundry there. He'd left clothes in Sarah's room, toiletries in the bathroom, snacks in the kitchen with his name on them. I tried to bring it up casually with Sarah. I said something like, "Hey, Kyle's been around a lot lately." She said, "Yeah, they were spending a lot of time together." I said that was great, but I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page about having guests over frequently. She said he wasn't a guest, he was her boyfriend, and I was being weird about her relationship. I let it go for a bit because I didn't want to cause drama, but it was starting to get annoying. Kyle would use up all the hot water with his long showers. He'd eat food I'd bought without asking. He'd leave his stuff all over the common areas. He'd have his friends over without checking if it was okay. He acted like he lived there because, functionally, he did. The breaking point was when I came home one day and my parking spot had a car in it. Not Sarah's car, not a visitor, just a random car. I had to park on the street. When I went inside, Kyle's friend was sitting on our couch playing video games. Kyle had given his friend permission to park in my spot while he came over to hang out. I asked Kyle to have his friend move the car. Kyle said they'd only be a few hours and I could just park on the street for now. I said no, that was my assigned parking spot and his friend needed to move. Kyle got attitude with me, said I was being dramatic over a parking spot. His friend, eventually moved, but Kyle was clearly annoyed with me. I texted Sarah later and said we needed to talk about the Kyle situation. She came home and we sat down. I explained that Kyle was essentially living with us without paying rent or being on the lease, which wasn't fair to me. I was paying half the rent for an apartment I was now sharing with 2 people. Plus, he was having friends over and making decisions about the apartment like he had a say in things. Sarah got defensive. She said Kyle didn't live there, he just stayed over a lot. I pointed out that he'd been there every single night for over a month. He had belongings there. He was using the utilities. He was treating it like his home. That was living there. She said I was being unreasonable and trying to control her relationship. I said I wasn't trying to control anything. I just wanted the living situation we'd agreed on when we signed the lease. 2 roommates. Not 2 roommates and a boyfriend. We went back and forth. She argued that I had friends over sometimes. I pointed out that my friends visited for a few hours. Not every single day. And they didn't shower there, or keep food there, or act like they lived there. She said if it was really a problem, Kyle could start paying some utilities. I said it wasn't just about money, it was about having a third person in an apartment meant for 2 people. She started crying and said I was trying to ruin her relationship. I said I liked Kyle fine, I just didn't want him living with us. Without any discussion or agreement, she said she'd talk to him about being there less. Kyle was there the next 5 nights in a row. Nothing changed. When I brought it up again, Sarah accused me of being jealous that she was in a relationship and I was single. That wasn't even close to the issue, but she decided that was what this was about. I looked at our lease. It said guests were allowed, but couldn't stay more than 14 consecutive days without being added to the lease. Kyle had definitely violated that. I thought about reporting it to the landlord, but I didn't want to get Sarah in trouble or be that person. Instead, I just started being less accommodating. Kyle wanted to shower? I'd take a long shower first. Kyle's food in the fridge? I'd move it to make room for mine. Kyle wanted to watch TV in the living room? I'd already be there doing my own thing and wouldn't move. I stopped trying to be friendly and started treating the apartment like the shared space it was supposed to be, not catering to him being there constantly. Kyle started complaining to Sarah that I was being hostile. Sarah confronted me, said I was making her boyfriend feel unwelcome. I said he wasn't welcome to live there without contributing to rent. She said that was cruel. I said it was honest. Our lease was up for renewal 3 months later. Sarah asked if I wanted to renew together. I said no. She seemed surprised, asked if it was because of Kyle. I said partially yes, because the living situation hadn't been what we'd agreed to, and I didn't want another year of it. She moved into a place with Kyle. I got a studio apartment by myself. It was smaller and more expensive since I was paying all the rent, but it was worth it to have my own space without an unofficial third roommate. Sarah and I didn't really stay friends after that. We'd see each other occasionally through mutual friends, but the roommate situation had damaged the friendship. Last I heard, she and Kyle broke up about a year after they moved in together. Apparently living together officially made them realize they weren't compatible. The whole experience taught me to set boundaries early and stick to them. If I'd been clearer from the start about what I was and wasn't okay with, maybe things wouldn't have gotten so tense. Or maybe they would have, because Sarah clearly didn't see any issue with the situation. Either way, I live alone now, and I don't plan on having roommates again unless absolutely necessary. The extra cost is worth the peace of mind. Next story coming up. I worked at a mid-sized tech company for about 3 years. It was my first job out of college. Decent pay, good benefits, mostly enjoyable work. My manager, Linda, seemed great at first. She was supportive, gave good feedback, seemed to care about the team's development. About a year into the job, I started noticing a pattern. I'd work on a project, complete it successfully, and then Linda would present it to upper management as her own work. Not our team's work, not my work that she oversaw, but her work. She'd use I instead of we in presentations. She'd talk about her strategy, her approach, her solutions, when really it was all stuff I'd developed. The first few times it happened, I thought maybe I was being sensitive or misunderstanding how management hierarchies worked. Maybe that was just how things were done. Managers took credit for their team's work. That was normal, right? But then I started noticing she only did it with my work. When other team members completed projects, she'd present them and clearly credit the team member who'd done the work. Jake developed this solution, or Emily led this initiative. With my work, it was always, I decided to approach it this way, or I implemented this system. It bothered me, but I didn't know how to address it without sounding like I was whining or being difficult. Linda was still nice to me in person, still gave me good performance reviews, still seemed to value me. Just in front of upper management, my work became her work. The situation that made me finally say something was a big project I'd spent 4 months developing. It was a new system for tracking client communications that would save the company time and improve customer satisfaction. I'd researched it, designed it, built it, tested it, implemented it, and train the team on it. It was probably the biggest contribution I'd made to the company. Linda scheduled a presentation with the executives to show off this new system. I assumed I'd be presenting, since it was my project. The day before the presentation, Linda told me I didn't need to attend because she'd handle it. I asked if she wanted me there to answer technical questions, and she said no. She had all the information she needed. I had a bad feeling but didn't push it. The next day, I heard from a coworker that Linda's presentation went great. The executives loved the new system. Linda got praised for her innovation and forward thinking. I checked my email. There was a company-wide email from the CEO congratulating Linda on developing such an effective solution and thanking her for her continued leadership. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. I'd had enough. I scheduled a one-on-one meeting with Linda. I brought printouts of my project documentation, emails showing my work on the system, everything I could think of to demonstrate that this was my project, not hers. I tried to be professional about it. I said I was glad the executives liked the system, and I was hoping we could discuss proper credit for the work. I explained that I'd spent months on this project, and I felt it was important for upper management to know who'd actually developed it, both for my career growth and for accuracy. Linda acted confused. She said, of course, she knew I'd worked on the project, but as the manager, she was responsible for everything her team produced. She said when she presented work to executives, she was presenting on behalf of the entire team. She said I seemed to be misunderstanding how organizational structures worked. I pointed out that when other team members completed projects, she specifically credited them by name in presentations and emails. I'd seen her do it multiple times. Why was my work different? She said I was being overly sensitive, and that if I was concerned about career advancement, the best thing I could do was focus on being a team player, rather than worrying about individual recognition. Then she said she had another meeting, and we'd have to continue this conversation later. We never continued that conversation. She started being noticeably cooler toward me after that meeting. My next performance review was still positive, but less enthusiastic than previous ones. I got the sense I was being punished for speaking up. I started documenting everything, every project I worked on. I saved emails, saved my work files with timestamps, made sure there was a clear record of what I'd done. I also started networking more within the company, making sure people outside my immediate team knew what I was working on. A few months later, there was a reorg. Linda's boss was replaced with someone new, a guy named Marcus, who'd been brought in from another department. As part of getting to know the team, Marcus scheduled individual meetings with everyone. In my meeting with Marcus, he asked about my role and what projects I'd been involved in. I mentioned the client communication tracking system. He said, "Oh yes, Linda's system. That's been really effective." I took a chance. I said, "Actually, I developed that system." Linda presented it, but the research, design, implementation, and training were all my work. Marcus looked surprised. He asked if I had documentation of that, and I said yes. I sent him everything I'd been saving, project files, emails, design documents, all of it clearly showing my work over those 4 months. A week later, I had another meeting with Marcus. He said he'd reviewed everything I'd sent, and he wanted to understand the situation better. He asked if this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern. I admitted it was a pattern, but I'd only recently started keeping thorough documentation. He thanked me for bringing it to his attention and said he'd look into it. I didn't know what that meant, but I hoped it meant something. Over the next month, Marcus apparently interviewed other team members and reviewed past projects and presentations. I don't know all the details of what he found, but I do know that Linda was quietly moved to a different department. Not fired, not demoted officially, just transferred to a role where she didn't manage people anymore. I got a new manager, someone promoted from within another team. In my first one-on-one with him, he said Marcus had briefed him on the credit issue and it wouldn't be happening going forward. He said my work would be properly attributed and I should always feel comfortable speaking up if that wasn't happening. My next project, I presented it myself to the executives. I got positive feedback directly. It was a weird feeling after so long having my work presented by someone else, but it felt right. I stayed at that company for another year before moving on to a better opportunity. But that situation with Linda taught me a lot. I learned that not all managers are good managers. I learned that documentation matters. I learned that speaking up is scary but sometimes necessary. And I learned that while speaking up doesn't always lead to immediate change, staying silent definitely doesn't. Linda's still at the company, as far as I know, just in a role where she's an individual contributor instead of a manager. I hope she learned something from the experience, but I honestly doubt it. Some people never think they're the problem. All right, let's move forward. I bought my first house 3 years ago. Small place, 2 bedrooms, decent yard, nice quiet neighborhood. One of the selling points was this beautiful oak tree in my backyard. It was huge, probably 50 or 60 years old, provided great shade in the summer, just a really impressive tree. My neighbors to the left were an older retired couple. Very sweet, no issues. My neighbors to the right were a younger family, parents around my age with 2 kids. I introduced myself when I moved in. They seemed nice enough, normal neighbor interactions. The family's names were Derek and Michelle. Their backyard connected to mine with just a low fence between the properties. The oak tree was entirely on my property, but some of the branches extended over into their yard, providing shade to part of their backyard too. For the first year, everything was fine. We'd wave when we saw each other, occasional small talk over the fence, typical neighbor stuff. Then one day, Derek knocked on my door. He said the leaves from my oak tree were falling into his yard and it was creating a lot of work for him to clean them up. He asked if I'd be willing to trim the branches that extended over his property. I said sure, that seemed reasonable. I hired a tree service to come out and trim the branches on that side. It cost me about $300, but whatever, trying to be a good neighbor. A few months later, Derek knocked on my door again. He said the tree was blocking sunlight to his yard and his grass wasn't growing well. He wanted me to trim it more aggressively. I looked at his yard. His grass looked fine. Normal for grass that gets partial shade, but nothing concerning. I told him I'd already trimmed the tree once, and I wasn't comfortable doing major trimming on a healthy, mature tree. He wasn't happy with that answer, but he left. The next week, Michelle came over. Different approach, more friendly. She said they were thinking about putting in a pool in their backyard, and the tree roots might be an issue. She asked if I'd ever considered removing the tree. I said no, absolutely not. I loved that tree, and it was one of the reasons I bought the house. She said she understood, but maybe I could think about it. I got a bad feeling. I called a property lawyer just to understand what my rights and responsibilities were regarding the tree. The lawyer said the tree was entirely on my property, so I had no legal obligation to remove it or even trim it beyond what extended over their property line. If roots crossed into their yard underground, that could be more complicated, but there'd have to be proven damage to their property first. A month later, I came home from work and immediately knew something was wrong. The tree looked different. I went into my backyard and saw that several large branches had been cut off, not trimmed neatly, but hacked off, leaving ugly stubs. The branches that had been cut were the ones extending toward Derek and Michelle's yard. I was furious. I went over and knocked on their door. Derek answered. I asked if he'd cut my tree. He said yes. The branches were over his property, so he was allowed to trim them. I said he'd done way more than trim them. He'd cut major branches and damaged the tree. He said that was my opinion. I called the police non-emergency line. They sent an officer out. The officer looked at the tree, looked at the property line, and said it was a civil matter, not a criminal one. He suggested I consult with a lawyer. I called the property lawyer again. He said what Derek did was likely illegal even. If the branches extended over the property line because he'd gone onto my property to cut them, and he'd caused damage beyond simple trimming, the lawyer said I could sue for the cost of the damage to the tree, which would need to be assessed by an arborist, plus any additional damages. I hired an arborist to assess the tree. He said Derek's cutting had caused significant damage, removing important structural branches and leaving the tree vulnerable to disease and decay. He said the tree might survive, but would need careful monitoring and treatment. The assessment and treatment plan came to about $1,200. The arborist also said the value of the damaged tree, as a mature oak on residential property, was probably around $8,000 to $10,000. Armed with this information, I sent Derek and Michelle a formal letter through my lawyer. It explained the damage to the tree, the costs I'd incurred, and demanded payment for both the immediate treatment costs and compensation for the long-term damage to the tree. It gave them 2 weeks to respond. They responded with their own lawyer, claiming they had every right to trim branches overhanging their property, and I was harassing them. Their lawyer's letter was aggressive and threatened to countersue for my legal harassment and the nuisance of my tree. My lawyer said we should take it to small claims court. The amount wasn't enough for regular court, but small claims could handle it. So I filed a claim for the full amount, the previous trimming I'd paid for, the arborist assessment and treatment, and compensation for the damage. The court date was set for 2 months out. In the meantime, Derek and Michelle completely stopped acknowledging my existence. They'd see me in my yard and go inside. They told their kids not to talk to me. They put up a taller fence between our properties. In court, I presented all my evidence: photos of the damage, the arborist's report, receipts for all the costs I'd incurred, the property survey showing the tree was entirely on my property, everything. My lawyer was clear and professional. Derek's lawyer tried to argue that overhanging branches were a nuisance, and Derek had a right to remove them. The judge pointed out that there were laws about how branches overhanging a property line could be handled, and that Derek had exceeded those guidelines by cutting major limbs and causing serious damage to the tree. I won. The judge awarded me the full amount I'd requested, about $11,000 total. Derek and Michelle were ordered to pay within 30 days. They paid, but they were bitter about it. They listed their house for sale 2 months later and moved out within 6 months. The new neighbors who moved in are lovely people who've never mentioned my tree except to say how nice it is. The tree survived, by the way. It took some time and treatment, but it's healthy now. Still provides great shade, still one of my favorite things about my property. The whole situation was unnecessary. If Derek had just asked nicely about a reasonable trim and offered to split the cost, I probably would have worked with him. Instead, he took matters into his own hands, damaged my property, and ended up paying way more than any tree trimming would have cost. I don't enjoy having had to sue my neighbors, but I also wasn't going to let someone damage my property and get away with it. Sometimes standing up for yourself costs money and stress, but it's worth it. Next one up. My cousin Hannah and I were close growing up. We're the same age, spent summers together, talked all the time. She was like a sister to me. When we went to different colleges, we stayed in touch. When we both moved to different cities for jobs, we visited each other. Real, solid friendship that had lasted our whole lives. Hannah got engaged 2 years ago to a guy named Chris. I'd met Chris a few times, seemed like a good match for her. When she called to tell me about the engagement, she asked me to be a bridesmaid. I said yes immediately. I was honored and excited. The wedding was planned for 18 months out. Destination wedding in Mexico, at a resort. Hannah sent out save the dates a year in advance so everyone could plan accordingly. I requested the time off work, started budgeting for the trip, looked at flights. I was fully committed. About 6 months before the wedding, Hannah sent out an email to all the bridesmaids with details about the bachelorette party. It was going to be in Las Vegas, 4 days, 3 nights. She'd found a great package deal on a hotel and had already booked it. Our share was going to be about $800 each, plus flights and spending money for while we were there. I looked at my budget. $800 for the bachelorette party, plus probably $300 for flights, plus spending money. I was already budgeting about $2,000 for the wedding itself, the Mexico trip, hotel, my bridesmaid dress, hair and makeup. This was adding up to way more than I'd planned for. I called Hannah and explained the situation. I said I absolutely wanted to celebrate with her, but the bachelorette party costs on top of the destination wedding costs were more than I could afford. I asked if there was any flexibility, maybe a shorter trip or a less expensive location. She said all the bridesmaids had agreed to Vegas, and she'd already put down a deposit using her credit card. She needed everyone to pay their share to reimburse her. She said she understood money was tight, but this was her wedding, and she hoped I'd prioritize it. I felt guilty. I looked at my finances again, tried to figure out if I could make it work. I had some savings, but I was also trying to build an emergency fund and pay off student loans. Spending $3,000 total on someone else's wedding events felt irresponsible. I told Hannah I couldn't do the bachelorette party, but I'd absolutely be at the wedding. She was disappointed, but said she understood. I thought that was the end of it. A few weeks later, I got a text from one of the other bridesmaids. She said Hannah was really hurt that I wasn't coming to the bachelorette party and was questioning whether I was really committed to being a bridesmaid. I was confused because Hannah had told me she understood. I called Hannah again. This time, she was less understanding. She said being a bridesmaid meant being there for all the events, not just the wedding. She said the other bridesmaids were all making it work financially, so why couldn't I? She said if I wasn't willing to do this for her, maybe I didn't value our friendship as much as she thought. That stung. I tried to explain again that it wasn't about not wanting to celebrate with her. It was about financial reality. She said maybe I needed to get a better job or manage my money better. That really stung. I stepped back from the conversation before it got worse. I told her I needed to think about things, and we'd talk later. Over the next week, I thought about it a lot. I talked to my parents, who said I shouldn't go into debt for someone else's wedding. I talked to friends who had mixed opinions. Some said friendship means sacrificing sometimes. Others said true friends don't expect you to wreck your finances for their wedding. I decided I couldn't do it. I couldn't afford the bachelorette party and the destination wedding. One or the other, not both. I called Hannah and told her I'd have to step down as a bridesmaid. I said I'd love to attend the wedding as a guest, but I couldn't commit to all the bridesmaid financial obligations. I apologized for any inconvenience. She was furious. She said I was abandoning her 6 months before her wedding. She said replacing a bridesmaid was going to be difficult and expensive because they'd have to order another dress. She said I was being selfish and making her wedding about me. She said if I stepped down as a bridesmaid, I shouldn't bother coming to the wedding at all. I was shocked. I'd expected her to be disappointed, maybe upset, but not to uninvite me entirely. I tried to reason with her, but she'd made up her mind. She said she only wanted people at her wedding who were fully supportive, and clearly I wasn't. We didn't talk for a month. I reached out a few times, but she didn't respond. The wedding happened without me. I saw photos on social media. It looked beautiful. Hannah looked happy. One of her coworkers had apparently stepped in as a replacement bridesmaid. After the wedding, after the honeymoon, I tried reaching out again. I sent a long message explaining that I never meant to hurt her, that I valued our friendship, that I hoped we could move past this. I said I understood if she needed time, but I missed her and wanted to repair our relationship. She responded briefly. She said she appreciated the message, but she'd realized through the wedding planning process who her real friends were. She said people who truly cared about her had shown up when it mattered. She said she needed to focus on those relationships going forward. That was 1.5 years ago. We haven't spoken since. I see her posts occasionally on social media. She seems happy in her marriage, but our friendship is just gone over wedding expenses I couldn't afford. I still don't think I was wrong to set financial boundaries. $3,000 is a lot of money for me. Going into debt or depleting my savings for someone else's wedding events isn't responsible, even for a close friend. But I also lost a lifelong friendship over it, which hurts more than I expected. I don't know if there was a right answer in that situation. Maybe I should have handled it differently, communicated better earlier on. Maybe Hannah's expectations were unreasonable. Maybe we both could have compromised more. All I know is that weddings seem to bring out weird priorities in people, and sometimes friendships don't survive them. Let's move on to the next story. This happened at a job I had about 5 years ago. I was working as an administrative assistant at a small insurance office. There were only about 10 people in the whole office, so everyone kind of had to wear multiple hats and be flexible. My boss, the office manager, was a woman named Patricia. Patricia was probably in her late 50s, very old school in her work philosophy. She'd been with the company for 30 years and had a lot of opinions about work ethic and dedication. One of Patricia's big things was that she didn't believe in calling out sick unless you were literally hospitalized. She tells stories about how she'd come to work with the flu, with migraines, with food poisoning, whatever. She wore it like a badge of honor that she'd never missed a day of work in 20 years. She expected the same from everyone else. If someone called in sick, she'd make comments about it when they came back. Feeling better after your day off? With a skeptical tone. Or, must be nice to take a break when the rest of us have to pick up the slack. She never said outright that we couldn't use our sick days, but she made it very clear she judged people who did. I generally have a pretty good immune system, so for the first year I worked there, I didn't need to call in sick. But then I caught something, probably from a family gathering. Started feeling bad on a Sunday night. Woke up Monday morning with a fever, sore throat, body aches, the works. I called the office first thing. Patricia answered. I told her I was sick and wouldn't be able to come in. She sighed loudly and said, "Well, we have a lot to get done today, but I suppose we'll manage without you. No, hope you feel better. No, take care of yourself." Just annoyance that I was inconveniencing her. I stayed home Monday and Tuesday, felt awful both days. Went back Wednesday, still not feeling great, but didn't want to deal with more of Patricia's attitude. When I walked in, she looked at me and said, "Oh, you decided to join us," in front of the whole office. A few months later, I woke up in the middle of the night with terrible stomach pain. I'd eaten something that clearly disagreed with me, spent hours being sick, wasn't getting better. By morning, I was exhausted and dehydrated, and definitely not in any condition to go to work. I called Patricia again, told her I had food poisoning and needed to stay home. She said, "Food poisoning? That seems convenient on a Friday." Like I'd made myself violently ill on purpose to get a long weekend. I was too miserable to even argue. I just said I wouldn't be in and hung up. When I came back Monday, Patricia made a comment about me, extending my weekend, and said she hoped I'd enjoyed my time off. I tried to explain that I'd been genuinely sick, and she just gave me this look like she didn't believe me at all. The final straw happened during flu season. There was a bad flu going around. Several people in the office had already gotten it. I started feeling symptoms on a Thursday afternoon, fever and chills. Knew it was the flu. I went to Patricia and asked if I could leave early. Explained I was starting to feel sick and wanted to get home before it got worse. She said we were too busy. I needed to stay until 5 like normal. I said I really wasn't feeling well, and I didn't want to get anyone else sick. She said if I left early, she'd have to mark it as a partial sick day, and did I really want to waste my sick days like that? I stayed. Felt progressively worse throughout the afternoon. By the time I left at 5, I had a full-blown fever and could barely drive home safely. I called in sick Friday, was sick all weekend, called in sick Monday, ended up being out for 3 full days. When I came back, Patricia sat me down for a conversation about attendance. She said she was concerned about my pattern of calling in sick, that it was affecting the team, that I needed to show more commitment. I pointed out that I'd only called in sick twice in over a year, and both times I'd been genuinely ill. She said everyone gets sick sometimes, but you have to push through it. I was done. The flu had been miserable, and it had probably been worse because I'd stayed at work while sick instead of going home early when I first felt symptoms. Plus, I'd probably exposed other people in the office by staying. I started job hunting, found a new position within 2 months, at a company with a much healthier culture around work-life balance. When I gave my 2 weeks' notice, Patricia asked if I was leaving because of anything she'd done. I considered being diplomatic, but decided to be honest. I said yes, actually. Her attitude about sick days had been a major factor. I explained that making people feel guilty for being sick wasn't good management, and it created an unhealthy work environment. She looked genuinely surprised, like she'd never considered that her behavior was a problem. My last day, she gave me a card and a small gift, acted like we were parting on great terms, never acknowledged anything I'd said about the sick day situation. I heard from a former coworker about 6 months later that the flu had run through that entire office because people kept coming in sick rather than dealing with Patricia's judgment. Patricia herself ended up getting the flu and missing a week of work, which everyone found ironic. The whole experience taught me that managers who pride themselves on never taking sick days aren't heroes. They're spreading germs and creating toxic expectations. Good managers encourage people to stay home when sick because it's better for everyone. Patricia never understood that and probably never will. But I'm at a much better job now, where if I say I'm sick, my boss just says, "Feel better," and that's the end of it. Makes all the difference. Let's get into the next one. I grew up thinking I knew my family pretty well. Normal family, no major drama. Everyone got along reasonably well. There were the usual family quirks and small tensions, but nothing serious. Or so I thought. When I was 25, my grandmother passed away. She was 92, had lived a long life, and her death wasn't unexpected. Sad, but peaceful. The funeral was standard. Lots of family gathered, sharing memories, supporting each other. After the funeral, there was a family dinner at my uncle's house. This was my dad's side of the family, his 3 siblings and their families, my cousins, everyone. My grandmother had been the matriarch, and this was the first time we'd all been together without her presence organizing everything. I was in the kitchen, helping clean up after dinner, when I overheard part of a conversation between my Aunt Lisa and my Aunt Joan. They were talking quietly, thought everyone else was in the living room, didn't realize I was around the corner putting dishes away. Lisa said something like, "Do you think we should ever tell them?" And Joan responded, "Mom made us promise we wouldn't. It's not our secret to tell." I didn't think much of it at first. Families have secrets, usually small things, old drama that doesn't matter anymore. But then Lisa said, "I just feel bad for David. He should know." David is my dad. I finished with the dishes and went back to the living room, but that conversation stuck in my head. What should my dad know? What secret had my grandmother made people promise to keep? Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I considered asking my dad directly, but what would I even say? "Hey Dad, I overheard your sisters talking about a secret about you." That seemed awkward and potentially stirring up drama over nothing. Instead, I decided to do some digging. I started with family photos. My grandmother had left boxes and boxes of old photos, and my Aunt Joan was sorting through them. I volunteered to help, thinking maybe I'd find some clue. Going through the photos, I noticed something odd. There were tons of pictures of my dad as a baby and young child, but they all had the same woman in them who wasn't my grandmother. This woman appeared in photos from what looked like my dad's first year of life, always holding him, clearly very involved. Then around the time my dad looked to be maybe 18 months or 2 years old, this woman disappeared from the photos entirely. I asked my Aunt Joan who the woman was. She got this uncomfortable look and said, "Oh, that was just a family friend who helped out when David was a baby." Then she quickly changed the subject. That made me more suspicious. I went home and started looking through old family documents. My dad had a box of his childhood things in the attic, stuff my grandmother had saved and given him years ago. School papers, report cards, some old toys. And in the bottom of the box, a birth certificate. I looked at it closely. My dad's name, his birth date, everything I expected. But in the space for mother's name, it didn't say my grandmother's name. It said Dorothy Ann Richardson. I had no idea who Dorothy Ann Richardson was. I looked at the birth certificate again. It was definitely my dad's. Everything else matched. But the mother listed wasn't the woman I'd known as my grandmother my whole life. I sat with this information for days. I didn't know what to do with it. My dad was 58 years old. if there was something about his birth or early childhood that he didn't know. Did he deserve to know now? Or would it just hurt him for no reason? Finally, I decided to talk to my Aunt Joan. I called her and said I needed to discuss something I'd found. We met for coffee, and I showed her the photo of my dad with the mysterious woman and told her about the birth certificate. Joan sighed. She said she'd been wondering when this would come up. Then she told me the story. My dad was adopted. He'd been born to a young woman named Dorothy who couldn't take care of him. My grandparents, who'd been trying to have children for years without success, adopted him when he was about 15 months old. They raised him as their own, loved him completely, and decided not to tell him he was adopted because at the time, that's how many adoptions were handled. They thought it would be easier for everyone if he just grew up thinking they were his biological parents. Dorothy, my dad's birth mother, had maintained some contact for the first year or so. That's who the woman in the photos was. But gradually she'd faded out of the picture, let my grandparents raise him without interference. My grandmother had made the whole family promise never to tell my dad because she was afraid it would change their relationship or make him feel like he wasn't really her son. I asked why none of my dad's siblings had ever told him, especially after they were all adults. Joan said they'd discussed it over the years, but my grandmother had been so adamant and they worried about how my dad would react. As time went on, it got harder to bring up, because why hadn't they told him sooner? I asked if my dad had any idea. Joan said she didn't think so, that he'd never questioned it or mentioned anything. She said my grandmother had been very careful to avoid situations where it might come up. Now I had this huge piece of information about my dad's life that he didn't know. I asked Joan what I should do. She said it was up to me, but she thought maybe it was time for the truth. My grandmother was gone, my dad was an adult, and keeping secrets hadn't made anything better. I decided to tell him. I met with my dad alone and explained everything I'd found and what Aunt Joan had told me. He was completely shocked. He'd had no idea, never suspected, had always assumed he was my grandparents' biological son. He went through a lot of emotions: confusion, hurt that he hadn't been told, anger at the secret keeping, sadness about my grandmother dying without ever telling him. But also, he said, it explained some things he'd always wondered about. Medical history that didn't quite match, personality differences from his siblings, little things he'd noticed but never connected. My dad decided he wanted to try to find information about Dorothy, his birth mother. With the name and some dates, we were able to find records. She'd passed away about 10 years earlier. She'd married, had 2 other children, lived a pretty ordinary life from what we could find. My dad has 2 half-siblings he never knew about, who never knew about him. He reached out to them. It was awkward at first, but they eventually met. They're not close, but they're in contact. They've shared information about Dorothy, medical history, family stories. My dad has said it feels like finding a piece of himself he didn't know was missing. The rest of the family has been supportive, though there's been some tension about the years of secret keeping. My dad's siblings feel guilty for not telling him sooner. My dad has had to process a lot of complex emotions about his identity in his childhood. As for me, I sometimes wonder if I did the right thing by telling him. On one hand, he deserved to know the truth about his own life. On the other hand, I disrupted his entire understanding of his identity and family history. But when I asked him directly if he'd rather I hadn't told him, he said no. He said the truth matters, even when it's complicated. Family secrets have a way of coming out eventually. Sometimes it's better to deal with the truth, even if it's messy, than to keep pretending everything is simple. Next story coming up. I joined a gym about 4 years ago. It was one of those chain gyms, you know the type. Big facility, lots of equipment, classes included, seemed like a good deal. The membership was $45 a month with a 1-year commitment, which seemed reasonable. I signed up in January because that's when everyone signs up for gyms. New year, new me, all that. The sales guy was friendly, went over all the paperwork with me, had me sign the contract. I asked specifically about cancellation policy because I'd heard horror stories about gyms making it impossible to cancel. He said after the 1-year commitment, I could cancel any time with 30 days written notice. Just had to fill out a form. No big deal. That sounded fine, so I signed. I actually used the gym pretty regularly that first year, went 3 or 4 times a week, got my money's worth. But after about 14 months, my work schedule changed and the gym was no longer convenient. I was getting home later, didn't have time to work out, and I was basically paying $45 a month to not go to the gym. I decided to cancel, went to the gym, asked for a cancellation form. The front desk person said I had to request it through email. Okay, weird, but fine. I sent an email requesting a cancellation form. A week went by with no response. I sent another email. Another week passed. Finally got a response saying I needed to call their customer service line to request cancellation. I was getting annoyed at this point, but I called. The customer service rep said they didn't handle cancellations over the phone. I needed to send a certified letter to their corporate office requesting cancellation. I said that was ridiculous. Why couldn't I just fill out a form at my local gym? She said that was company policy. I looked up the address for their corporate office and sent a certified letter requesting cancellation of my membership, effective in 30 days. As per my contract, I paid extra for tracking so I'd know when it was delivered. The letter was delivered and signed for by someone at their office. 30 days passed. I checked my bank account. They'd charged me another $45. I called customer service again. Different rep this time. She said they had no record of receiving a cancellation request. I explained I'd sent a certified letter, had proof of delivery. She said she'd look into it and call me back. She never called back. I called again a week later. Another rep said the same thing, no record of my cancellation request. I was furious. I asked to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor said sometimes letters get misplaced. I'd need to send another one. I sent another certified letter. Made copies of everything this time. Got confirmation it was delivered. Waited another 30 days. They charged me again. At this point, I'd been trying to cancel for 3 months and had paid an extra $135 for a gym membership I wasn't using. I called my bank and explained the situation. The bank said I could dispute the charges, but it would be better to resolve it with the gym first. I went to my local gym in person and refused to leave until someone helped me cancel my membership. The manager there was sympathetic, but said cancellations had to go through corporate. She couldn't process them at the location level. I showed her my certified mail receipts. She called corporate while I waited. After being on hold for 40 minutes, she got through to someone. That person claimed, again, that they had no record of my cancellation requests. The manager argued with them, confirmed my membership number, confirmed the certified mail tracking numbers. Finally, the corporate person said they'd process the cancellation, but I'd have to wait another 30 days. I asked why I had to wait another 30 days when I'd already submitted 2 cancellation requests months ago. The corporate person said that's just how the system worked. I was beyond frustrated but didn't know what else to do. I waited another month. They charged me again. I lost it. I called my bank back and disputed all the charges from the past 3 months, explaining the entire situation and providing all my documentation. The bank reversed the charges and blocked future charges from the gym. The gym sent me threatening letters saying I owed them money and they were going to send my account to collections. I responded with copies of all my cancellation attempts, the certified mail receipts, everything. I also filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau and left detailed reviews on every platform I could find. Turns out I wasn't the only one. When I left my reviews, I found hundreds of other people with the exact same experience. This gym chain had a systematic process of making cancellation as difficult as possible, hoping people would either give up or keep paying. It was basically a scam. The gym eventually backed off after my bank dispute and BBB complaint. They sent a letter saying my membership was canceled and my account was settled. I never paid them another dollar. About a year later, I saw a news story that this gym chain was being sued in a class action lawsuit for their cancellation practices. I joined the lawsuit. It settled eventually, and I got about $70 back, which didn't cover everything I'd paid while trying to cancel, but it was something. The whole experience taught me to be extremely careful about gym contracts. Now I only use gyms with month-to-month memberships and clear, straightforward cancellation policies, and I read every review I can find before signing anything. Some businesses operate on the principle that if they make something difficult enough, people will give up. Sometimes you have to be stubborn and fight back, even when it's exhausting. And document everything, because you never know when you'll need proof of what you tried to do. Let's move to the next one. I had a friend in my early 20s named Rachel. We'd met in college, stayed friends after graduation, hung out regularly. She was fun, outgoing, always had interesting stories. We had a good friendship for about 5 years. Rachel was not great with money. She had a decent job, but lived beyond her means. Always had the newest phone, went on expensive trips, bought designer clothes. She also ate out constantly and had expensive taste in everything. I knew she had credit card debt, but I figured that was her business. One day, Rachel called me upset. She said her car had broken down and the repair was going to be $1,200. She didn't have the money and her credit cards were maxed out. She asked if I could lend her the money and she'd pay me back within 2 months when she got her tax return. I hesitated. I'd never lent money to friends before because I'd always heard it was a bad idea. But Rachel was a close friend. She seemed genuinely in a bind, and $1,200 wouldn't break me. I had it in my savings. So I said yes. I transferred her the money. She was incredibly grateful, thanked me repeatedly, promised she'd pay me back as soon as possible. I said no rush, just when she could manage it. 2 months passed. She got her tax return. I knew because she posted on social media about booking a trip to Miami with it. She didn't mention paying me back. I sent her a casual text asking about the loan. She said she'd had some unexpected expenses come up, but she'd get me the money soon. Another month passed. I brought it up again. She said she was struggling financially and could she pay me back in installments. I said sure, whatever worked for her. She said she'd start paying me $200 a month. The first month, she paid me $200. Great, that was something. The second month, nothing. I asked about it. She said she'd forgotten. She'd get it to me next month. Next month, nothing again. This pattern continued for about 6 months. She'd occasionally send me $100 or $200, always with apologies and promises to do better. But she was also posting on social media about going out to expensive dinners, buying new clothes, going to concerts. She clearly had money for fun stuff, just not to pay me back. I tried to talk to her about it directly. I said I understood money was tight, but I really needed her to prioritize paying back the loan because it was a significant amount for me. She got defensive. She said I was being pushy about money, and it was stressing her out. She said she'd pay me back when she could, and me pressuring her was making things worse. I backed off because I didn't want to damage the friendship, but I was frustrated. After about 10 months, she'd paid me back maybe $500, still owed me $700. Then Rachel announced she was moving across the country for a new job opportunity. I asked about the remaining money I'd lent her. She said she'd pay me back once she got settled in her new place. She moved. I never heard from her about the money again. When I'd text about it, she'd either ignore the message or respond with vague promises. Eventually, she stopped responding at all. I reached out one more time, about a year after she'd moved, and said I really needed her to pay back the remaining $700. She responded that she was still dealing with moving expenses and new city costs, and she'd get me the money, eventually, but I needed to stop harassing her about it. That was the last real conversation we had. The friendship was effectively over. I never got the remaining $700. Looking back, I learned several expensive lessons. First, don't lend money you can't afford to lose, because there's a good chance you won't get it back. Second, if someone is bad with money in general, they're not going to suddenly become responsible when it comes to paying you back. Third, mixing money and friendship is risky because if things go wrong with the money, the friendship usually goes too. $700 was an expensive lesson, but I never made that mistake again. If a friend needs money now, I either give it as a gift with no expectation of return, Or I say I can't help. No more loans. Rachel and I haven't spoken in years. Last I saw on social media, she was living what looked like a pretty comfortable life in her new city. No idea if she ever thinks about the money she owes me. Probably not. The whole situation sucks because I lost both money and a friendship, but at least I learned something from it. Next story up. I like writing reviews for restaurants I visit, not professionally, just on Google and Yelp, trying to give helpful feedback to other people looking for places to eat. I usually keep them balanced, mention what was good and what could be improved, try to be fair. About 2 years ago, I went to a new restaurant that had opened near me. It was marketed as upscale Italian, nice atmosphere, good reviews online. Made a reservation for a Friday night with my girlfriend. We showed up on time. The hostess was nowhere to be found, so we stood at the entrance for about 10 minutes before someone acknowledged us. Not a great start, but okay. Maybe they were busy. We were finally seated. The table was nice. Ambiance was good. Menu looked interesting. Our server came over after another 10-minute wait. He seemed stressed and distracted, took our drink order, and disappeared. The drinks took 20 minutes. We tried to order food when he brought the drinks, but he said he'd be right back to take our order. Another 15 minutes went by. At this point, we'd been there almost an hour and hadn't even ordered food yet. When we finally did order, I got the pasta special that was recommended. My girlfriend ordered chicken marsala. The server said it would be out soon. Soon turned out to be 50 minutes. We could see other tables around us getting frustrated with wait times too. The restaurant was busy, but not so busy that this seemed normal. Something was clearly going wrong in the kitchen. When our food arrived, my pasta was cold. Not room temperature, actually cold. Like it had been sitting out for a while before being brought to us. My girlfriend's chicken was overcooked, dry as cardboard. The portions were small for the prices we were paying. I politely flagged down our server and explained that my pasta was cold. He apologized, took it, back to be reheated. Came back 10 minutes later with what was clearly the same pasta, now microwaved to the point of being unevenly hot. Some bites were burning, some were still cold. It was worse than before. By this point, we'd been there almost 2 hours. My girlfriend had eaten maybe half of her disappointing chicken, and my pasta was inedible. We asked for the check, planning to cut our losses and leave. The bill came to $160 for 2 entrees, 2 drinks, and 1 appetizer we'd ordered while waiting. For reference, the pasta was $32 and the chicken was $36. Not cheap. I thought about asking to speak to a manager, but everyone seemed so stressed and overwhelmed that I just paid and left. Sometimes you pick your battles. When I got home, I wrote a detailed review. I wasn't mean or exaggerated. I just honestly described our experience. The long waits, the cold food, the poor quality, the high prices for what we got. I gave it 2 stars because the atmosphere was nice and our server seemed to be trying his best despite whatever chaos was happening behind the scenes. I posted the review on Google and Yelp and didn't think much more about it. A week later, I got a notification that the restaurant owner had responded to my review. I checked it out, expecting maybe an apology or an explanation. Instead, the owner had written this long, aggressive response basically calling me a liar. He said the wait times I described were impossible, that his kitchen would never serve cold food, that I was clearly making things up to damage his business. He suggested I was a competitor trying to hurt his reputation. It was completely over the top. Other people started commenting on his response to my review, saying they'd had similar experiences. More negative reviews started appearing from other customers describing long waits and food issues. The owner responded to those reviews too, always with the same aggressive, defensive tone. He accused multiple people of lying, suggested they were all part of some conspiracy against him, refused to acknowledge any problems with his restaurant. I posted a reply to his response, calmly stating that everything in my review was accurate and I had no reason to lie. I said I'd wanted to like the restaurant and hoped they'd improve their service for future customers. He responded again, this time saying I was banned from his restaurant and he'd call the police if I tried to return, which was absurd because I had no intention of returning anyway, but his response made him look unhinged. The situation got more attention. A local food blogger wrote an article about the restaurant's terrible responses to reviews. More people left negative reviews describing similar experiences to mine. The restaurant's overall rating dropped significantly. About 3 months later, I drove past the restaurant and noticed it had closed. A sign on the door said they were temporarily closed for renovations, but they never reopened. A different restaurant is in that space now. I felt a little bad about it. I didn't want to put anyone out of business, but also, the problems at that restaurant were real, and the owner's response to legitimate criticism showed he wasn't interested in improving. If your business model is serving overpriced cold food and then attacking customers who point it out, you're not going to succeed. The whole thing taught me that how a business responds to criticism matters as much as the criticism itself. If that owner had responded to my review with, "We're sorry you had a bad experience. We're working on our service issues," it would have been fine. Instead, he went on the attack and made everything worse. I still write restaurant reviews, but I'm always careful to be fair and honest. I describe what happened without exaggeration. If a place has good aspects, I mention those too. And I've learned that if an owner responds defensively and aggressively to reviews, that's usually a sign of deeper problems with the business. Also, never underestimate the power of a well-written, honest review. They can actually make a difference, for better or worse. All right, moving forward. My best friend Jen turned 30 last year. Her boyfriend Mike wanted to throw her a surprise party and asked me to help organize it since I knew Jen better than anyone. I was excited to help. Jen loves parties, and I thought she'd really appreciate the effort. Mike and I started planning about 2 months in advance. We picked a date, booked a private room at a restaurant Jen liked, created a guest list of about 40 people, friends from college, co-workers, family, people from different parts of her life. It was going to be a great mix. The plan was for Mike to take Jen out to dinner, and I'd get everyone to the restaurant and hidden in the private room. Then Mike would bring Jen in for what she thought was just a dinner with him, and we'd all yell surprise. Classic surprise party setup. We sent out invitations about 6 weeks before the party. Most people RSVP'd yes pretty quickly. But here's where things started getting complicated. Jen's older sister Laura RSVP'd for herself plus 3, which turned out to be her husband, and 2 kids. The party was meant to be adults only, but Mike didn't want to cause drama by telling Laura she couldn't bring her kids. Then Jen's coworker Amanda asked if she could bring her new boyfriend. Mike said yes. Then another coworker asked the same thing. Mike kept saying yes because he didn't want to be rude. The guest list, that was supposed to be 40 people, was now up to about 55. I tried to tell Mike we should set some boundaries, but he said it was fine. The more people, the better. I was worried, but I went along with it. 2 weeks before the party, Jen mentioned to me that she wanted to do something low-key for her birthday. Maybe just dinner with Mike and a few close friends. She said she'd been stressed at work and wasn't really in the mood for anything big. I obviously couldn't tell her about the surprise party, so I just said I was sure Mike would plan something nice. 1 week before the party, Mike's mom called him and said she wanted to invite some of her friends who'd known Jen for years. Mike said, okay. Now we were at 60-something people, and I was really worried we'd outgrown the private room space we'd booked. 3 days before the party, I found out through a mutual friend that Jen had been having a really rough time at work. Like, really rough. She'd been dealing with a difficult project, working long hours, and was completely exhausted. The mutual friend mentioned that Jen had said she was dreading her birthday because she just wanted to sleep and not deal with anything social. I called Mike and suggested maybe we should cancel the surprise party. Jen clearly wasn't in the right headspace for it. Mike said it was too late. Everyone had already been invited, and once she saw everyone, she'd be happy. I had a bad feeling, but didn't know what else to do. The party was happening. The night of the party, I got to the restaurant early to help set up. The room we'd booked was definitely too small for the number of people who showed up. It was crowded and loud even before Jen arrived. Some people had brought extra guests without asking. It was chaos. Mike texted that they were 5 minutes away. We got everyone quiet and ready for the surprise. The door opened, Mike walked in with Jen, and we all yelled, "Surprise!" Jen's face did not show excitement or joy. She looked shocked, then overwhelmed. Then I swear I saw a flash of actual anger before she forced a smile. She hugged a few people near the door, but I could tell she was not happy. Throughout the party, Jen was clearly trying to be polite and grateful, but she looked exhausted. She was making the rounds, talking to people, thanking everyone for coming, but there was no energy behind it. She looked like she wanted to cry, or leave, or both. Laura's kids were running around screaming, which added to the chaos. The restaurant staff was overwhelmed trying to serve 60-plus people in a space meant for 40. The noise level was insane. It was everything Jen wouldn't want at that moment in her life. About an hour into the party, I found Jen in the bathroom. She was sitting on the closed toilet lid with her head in her hands. When she saw me, she started crying. She said she appreciated the effort, but this was literally her nightmare right now. She was exhausted, stressed, had wanted a quiet birthday, and instead she had to be on for 60 people in a crowded, loud room when all she wanted was to go home and sleep. I felt terrible. I apologized and said I'd tried to suggest canceling, but Mike had insisted she'd love it. She said Mike never listens when she tells him what she actually wants. He always decides he knows better. Jen went back out, finished the party, blew out candles on a cake, opened some gifts, thanked everyone, played the part of the grateful birthday girl, but I knew she'd hated every minute. After the party, I talked to Mike. I said gently that Jen hadn't seemed to enjoy herself, and maybe we should have listened to the signals she'd been giving about wanting something low-key. Mike said I was wrong. She'd had a great time. Everyone had told him what a great party it was. I didn't push it, but I knew better. I talked to Jen a few days later, and she confirmed that while she appreciated the thought, the party had been overwhelming and stressful. She said she told Mike multiple times in the weeks leading up to her birthday that she wanted something quiet, but he'd either not listened or not believed her. She and Mike actually broke up about 3 months later. The party wasn't the main reason, but it was symptomatic of a bigger issue, where Mike would decide what he thought Jen wanted, instead of actually listening to what she told him she wanted. The lesson I learned is that surprise parties are risky. You can put in all this effort and planning, but if the person isn't in the right place mentally or emotionally, it can backfire completely. If someone tells you they want something low-key for their birthday, believe them, even if you think a big party would be more fun. Also, guest list management matters. Don't let your 40-person party balloon to 65 people just because you can't say no. That's a recipe for chaos. I've never helped plan a surprise party since, and I don't plan to. Too many variables, too much potential for it to go wrong. Sometimes the best gift is just listening to what someone actually wants instead of what you think they should want. Let's get to the next story. My grandfather died 3 years ago. He was 87, had been in declining health, and his death wasn't unexpected. He'd lived a good life, been married to my grandmother for 60 years before she passed, raised 4 kids, had a bunch of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Good man, loved by his family. After the funeral, the family gathered for the reading of the will. My grandfather had been fairly well off, not rich, but comfortable. He owned his house outright, had savings, some investments, the usual stuff someone accumulates over a long life of working and saving. The will was straightforward, or so we thought. The house was to be sold and the proceeds split evenly among his 4 children, my dad and his 3 siblings. His savings and investments were to be split the same way. Some specific items, jewelry and personal effects, were designated for specific grandchildren. It seemed fair and clear, except there was one thing: a coin collection. My grandfather had been collecting coins since he was a teenager. It was his hobby, his passion. He had rare coins, old coins, valuable coins. The collection was worth somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000, according to the appraisal mentioned in the will. The will stated that the coin collection should go to the grandchild, who shows the most interest in numismatics and would appreciate its historical value. That was it. No specific name, just that vague description. It was like my grandfather had created a puzzle for us to solve, or a competition for us to have. Immediately, 3 of my cousins claimed they should get the collection. My cousin Todd said he'd always talked to Grandpa about the coins and had shown interest. My cousin Melissa said she'd helped Grandpa organize the collection a few years ago. My cousin Ryan said Grandpa had once told him he'd make a good coin collector. I didn't say anything because honestly, while I'd thought the coins were cool when Grandpa showed them to me as a kid, I wasn't particularly interested in them. I wasn't going to fight over it. But the 3 cousins who wanted the collection got serious about staking their claims. Todd printed out emails he'd exchanged with Grandpa about specific coins. Melissa brought photos of her helping organize the collection. Ryan claimed Grandpa had verbally promised him the coins multiple times, though he had no proof. The executor of the will, my Uncle James, who was my dad's younger brother, was supposed to decide who got the collection based on Grandpa's vague instructions. This put him in a terrible position. No matter who he chose, 2 other people would be upset. Uncle James tried to suggest selling the collection and splitting the money 4 ways among Grandpa's kids. Like the rest of the estate, the 3 cousins who wanted it all refused. They said the will specifically designated it for a grandchild, not to be sold. Then things got nasty. Todd accused Melissa of manipulating Grandpa in his later years to make him think she cared about the coins. Melissa accused Todd of making up his supposed interest. Ryan accused both of them of being greedy. Family dinners became tense. People took sides. Todd's mom, my Aunt Karen, thought Todd should get it because he was the oldest grandchild. Melissa's dad, my Uncle James, who was also the executor, obviously thought Melissa had the best claim. Ryan's mom, my Aunt Beth, argued that Ryan had the closest relationship with Grandpa overall. My dad stayed out of it, which I appreciated. He said the coins would go to whoever they went to, and it wasn't worth destroying family relationships over. 6 months went by with no resolution. The estate couldn't be fully settled because this one asset was in dispute. Uncle James finally made a decision. He chose Melissa, his own daughter, to receive the collection. His reasoning was that she'd documented her help with organizing it and had shown tangible involvement. Todd and Ryan were furious. They accused Uncle James of favoritism and nepotism. They said he'd given the collection to his own daughter despite it not being the clear intent of the will. Ryan's mom, Aunt Beth, threatened to sue. Todd stopped speaking to most of the family. The situation split the family pretty dramatically. Some people thought Uncle James had made a reasonable decision given impossible circumstances. Others thought he'd been biased toward his own kid. Everyone had an opinion. 8 months after Grandpa's death, with the family still fractured over this, Melissa made a decision. She announced that she was selling the coin collection and splitting the proceeds evenly among all the grandchildren, not just the 3 who'd fought over it. All 12 of us would get an equal share. Some people thought this was generous and the right thing to do. Others thought she was admitting she didn't deserve the collection in the first place. Todd said if she was just going to sell it anyway, Grandpa's wishes were being ignored completely. The collection sold for $93,000. Split 12 ways, each grandchild got about $7,700. Nice chunk of money, but nowhere near what the 3 fighting cousins had been hoping to get individually. The family is still kind of fractured over this. Todd doesn't come to family gatherings anymore. Ryan comes but barely talks to Uncle James or Melissa. The adults, my dad and his siblings, have mostly moved past it, but there's still tension. The whole thing taught me that vague instructions in a will can destroy families. If my grandfather had just named a specific person to get the coins, this whole mess could have been avoided. Maybe someone would have been disappointed, but at least it would have been clear and final. I used my $7,700 to pad my emergency fund. I didn't fight for the collection. I didn't take sides in the dispute. and I still have relationships with everyone in the family. Meanwhile, the cousins who fought the hardest for it damaged relationships and ended up with the same amount as everyone else anyway. Sometimes the worst inheritance fight isn't about money, it's about ego and being right. And sometimes the best thing you can do is stay out of it entirely. Moving on to the last story. I bought a townhouse 5 years ago in a community with a homeowners association. I knew HOAs could be annoying, but the rules seemed reasonable when I reviewed them before buying. Keep your lawn maintained, no loud parties after 10 p.m., park in designated spots, basic stuff. I figured I could handle that. For the first year, the HOA was fine, barely noticed them. I got a monthly newsletter, paid my dues, followed the rules, no issues. Then the HOA board had an election. A woman named Patricia ran for president on a platform of maintaining community standards and protecting property values. She won. That's when things started going downhill. Patricia took her role very seriously. Too seriously. She started doing daily walks around the community looking for violations, and she found them everywhere, even when they didn't really exist. I got my first violation notice about 6 weeks after she took over. Apparently my house numbers weren't the correct shade of bronze according to the CCNRs. They looked bronze to me, but Patricia had brought a color swatch and determined they were too dark. I had 30 days to replace them or face a fine. I thought about fighting it, but decided it wasn't worth it. I ordered new house numbers in the approved shade of bronze, which cost me $45. Annoying, but whatever. 2 weeks later, another notice. My mailbox flag was faded and needed to be repainted. Okay, fine. I repainted it. $10 for paint and an hour of my time. Then, another notice. The mulch in my front flower bed was the wrong color. It needed to be dark brown, and mine was reddish. This was getting ridiculous, but I replaced the mulch. $80. The notices kept coming. My doormat was too large. My porch light was the wrong style. I had a package delivered that sat on my porch for more than 24 hours. My trash can was visible from the street on a non-trash day. Every single week, there was something. Other homeowners in the community were getting the same treatment. We started talking to each other, commiserating. Everyone had stories about ridiculous violations and expensive corrections they'd had to make. Patricia was on a power trip, and we were all suffering for it. I decided to start attending the monthly HOA board meetings to voice concerns. At the first meeting I attended, I politely suggested that maybe the violation notices were getting excessive, and we should focus on actual problems rather than minor aesthetic issues. Patricia said the rules were the rules, and everyone had agreed to them when they bought their homes. She said if people didn't like the rules, they could sell their townhouses and move elsewhere. Several other board members nodded along. They were all Patricia's friends, who she'd encouraged to run for the board. After that meeting, my violation notices increased. Now I was getting 2 or 3 per week. Patricia was clearly targeting me for speaking up. My garbage can lid wasn't fully closed. My car was parked 6 inches over the line in my designated spot. My front curtains were visible from outside and weren't an approved color. I started documenting everything. Every violation notice, every fine, every ridiculous claim. I also started researching the HOA rules and state laws about homeowners associations. Turns out, Patricia was violating several procedures herself. She was issuing fines without proper notice periods. She was enforcing rules that weren't actually in the CCNRs, but were just her personal preferences. She was selectively enforcing rules against people she didn't like, while ignoring the same violations when her friends committed them. I gathered evidence of all of this. Photos showing her friends with the same violations she'd cited me for. Copies of the CCNRs showing rules she'd made up. Documentation of improper fine procedures. I brought all of this to the next board meeting along with about 15 other frustrated homeowners. We presented our evidence and demanded that Patricia step down, or at least change her approach. Patricia refused. She said we were bullies trying to harass her out of her elected position. She started crying and said she was just trying to keep the community nice. The meeting got heated. People were yelling. Nothing was resolved. Patricia and her board majority wouldn't budge. So we organized. About 20 homeowners got together and filed a formal complaint with the state agency that oversees HOAs. We detailed all the improper procedures, selective enforcement, and harassment. We also organized a recall election. You needed 30% of homeowners to sign a petition to trigger a recall vote. We got 45%. Patricia fought the recall hard. She sent out newsletters claiming we were trying to destroy the community. She went door to door talking to homeowners who hadn't been as affected by her violations, trying to get them on her side. The recall election happened. Patricia and 2 of her board allies were removed. New people were elected, including me. We immediately passed a resolution limiting violation notices to actual health and safety issues, or major rule violations. No more harassment over minor aesthetic preferences. Patricia was furious. She sold her townhouse and moved out within 3 months. Before she left, she apparently tried to get one last violation notice sent to me for having a wreath on my door that was too large. The new board declined to process it. The community has been much better since then. We still have rules. We still maintain standards, but it's reasonable now. People aren't living in fear of daily violation notices. Property values actually went up after Patricia left, probably because the community became a more pleasant place to live. I served on the board for 2 years before rotating off. It taught me a lot about how a little bit of power can go to someone's head, and how important it is for communities to have checks and balances. Also, taught me to always research HOA boards carefully before buying in a community with one. Patricia's still in the community Facebook group somehow, and she occasionally posts passive-aggressive comments about how standards have declined since she left. We all ignore her. Sometimes standing up to petty tyrants is exhausting and time-consuming, but it's worth it to protect your peace and your property rights. And that's it for this video. Thank you for listening.